Shalom and welcome everyone to this week's edition of the ICEJ webinar series. We're so glad that you're joining us. We know we always get people from all over the world coming to you from the headquarters of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. I'm David Parsons, one of our vice presidents, our senior spokesman. We're now 5 months, more than 150 days into Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza, but it has other fronts as well. Of course, we're getting a lot of the news of the artillery duels, all the exchanges on the northern border with Lebanon between the IDF and Hezbollah. But today we're dealing with another front, Judea and Samaria, and the impact of the war there. And our featured guest is my friend Israel Medad. He's formerly with he's still with them, but he was the former director of education at the Menachem Heritage Center. That's where I've known him for many, many years. Good to have you, Israel.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Israel studied at Yeshiva University in the U.S. and made Aliyah, I think, early 70s. And Israel, you settled in Shiloh, which is north of Jerusalem, in the middle of the tribal inheritance of Ephraim, I believe, near Bethel, Eli, Ophrah, so many sites that are in our Bible. Shiloh, the Ark of the Covenant sat there for 369 years, I believe. It's one of the most authentic Bible sites in the whole land. And you've been an advisor, a speechwriter to Israeli cabinet ministers, other political parties. You've had a media review column in the Jerusalem Post. I think you and someone else who are regularly reviewing the Israeli media, the foreign media. I've always appreciated that. But also you've acted as like an informal spokesman, an advocate for the Yesha communities, the Israeli, the Jewish communities out in the territories, Judea Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank. And I've always appreciated your role in that regard. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Okay.
Good to be with you.
This is our first webinar that's really focusing on Judea and Samaria, what it's been like for you guys since October 7th. But I'd just like to start by going back to that day. What was it like for you? I mean, it's a Shabbat. I don't know if you had any rocket alarms up in Shiloh. When did you first realize something horrible was going on? Because most observant Jews there wouldn't have their TVs on, wouldn't have their phone or radio on.
As you correctly remarked, the overwhelming population of Shiloh is religious, or should I say religiously observant. And therefore, there were whispers somewhere around 8:30 in the morning, but it was coming from the security personnel, who of course are on alert 24/7, whether it's Shabbat or holiday or whatever. But most people, and myself included, were unaware of the extent of the violence and what was happening. Neither the rocket attacks nor the reports of an incursion into the southern southwest portion of the Negev Desert, what we call the Gaza envelope communities. And it wasn't until the holiday was completely over, which was maybe about close to 7 o'clock in the evening, if I can remember, that we turned on our radios and televisions and learned the full extent of the tragic circumstances and events that were happening.
Yeah, we'd been working hard at our big Sukkot celebration, Feast of Tabernacles. It was time to rest and sleep in on Shabbat, but we had rocket alarms right around 8 o'clock here, and you can't avoid that. And you open up your phones. I started looking, and it was horrible already. But you're saying for most of you, it was only after Shabbat you realized the enormity of what had happened.
Correct. We were about, I'd have to say, close to about a 10-hour delay
Yes.
to catch up.
At least, if it was around 7, it's about 12 hours. This thing all started about 6:30 in the morning. And we had a real fear as we watched this unfold. I live about in Abu Tur in Jerusalem, about 3 blocks, maybe 2 blocks from the Begin Center where you work, and about 3 blocks from the Arab part of East Jerusalem, the old dividing line. And I'll be honest, we had a real fear of home invasions, just like the people down there. You really didn't know, was Hezbollah going to join? Were the Arabs in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, all a part of this plan? Are they going to start invading homes? Did y'all sense that there?
Yes, I can understand that. In our community of Shiloh, I'd have to say that that wasn't a conscious thought. We felt very safe where we were. We did not hear any of the alarms, alerts for the rockets. It didn't reach us whatsoever. And so we were blessedly cut off from any of the tension or any of the anxiety that I think about 80% or more of the Israeli population was undergoing.
Okay, well, what's been the reaction since? I know that here in the Jerusalem area, a lot more people are going and getting gun licenses, and I know a lot of the Israelis who live in the communities in Yesha and Judea and Samaria, some of them already have gun permits and carry them.
Yes, well, look, I have been at Shiloh since 1981. That's about going on now about 43 years or so. We've been through the first Intifada and the second Intifada. We've always had problems on the roads of what the professionals call low intensity terror, which means rocks and other incidents. And we've had worse. We have if I'm not mistaken, 9 members of the community of Shiloh who have fallen to Arab terror over the years, including a 5-month-old baby, Yehuda Shoam, who was struck by a rock, several high school students, and older people. So that is always with us, and we are prepared, both in terms of personal arming, although if you don't tell our enemies, I don't carry a long rifle anymore. I'm past the age of active guard duty for the community, but we're very well protected both internally and by the Army. It's only the roads that pose any real problem, but that's another question altogether.
So Shiloh, what is it, around 10,000 people now? 5 to 10 who live there?
Well, Shiloh itself is not that large. We're talking about maybe in Shiloh 3,500 people, but what we call the Shiloh block, which extends from Eli to us, is probably altogether about 10,000 Jews living in that relatively small area about 25 miles north of Jerusalem.
Yes, above Ramallah. And what's been the impact there? Like your community guard and your community security teams have been beefed up, and do you sense the war around you, because the IDF has gotten more active in Judea and Samaria?
Well, in terms of our security, yes, it has been increased and intensified. Every vehicle is checked coming in. It has to go through a little bit of an extra blockade that we put up so that the vehicles have to actually slow down before coming to the guard gate. We do not have a complete circumference fence in Shiloh. We do not agree with that ideologically. We don't think it's the best operational way. And so we have 24-hour guard duty at several outposts, 2 to 3 overlooking, as you know, because you've been there, it's up on we were on a series of 2.5 hills or so. So we have very good lookout positions. And that, of course, is we have not suffered any threats whatsoever. None of the Arab workers who used to work in Shiloh, whether in agriculture or in construction, have been there at all. So there's nothing of that effect. The only real concern, of course, is that we have lost one member to the fighting in the south in Gaza. Several other people have lost relatives, and we have one person who was abducted and is being kept hostage in Gaza. So that, if I can use the word presence, that heavy presence of the fact that, yes, we have suffered, or people of Shiloh have suffered and are suffering, is very much with us.
Yeah. And yeah, I was going to ask about, I know a lot of the Jewish communities in the territories, they make efforts at coexistence locally, reaching out to some of the Arab villages around them, which I'm sure Shiloh has done for years, and you wind up hiring some of the folks you learn to trust. They come in and work, cleaning houses or building on building sites and all, but you say they're all gone over the last 5 months.
Well, yes, one of the results of Hamas's invasion and the fighting is that they have severely, if I could use the word, injured the economic capacity of the Arabs in our area to make a living.
That's interesting.
As we should know, the hourly wage of Arabs working with Jewish communities is double what they can earn in their own cities. And there's a great disparity between the grandees of Ramallah and Shechem, Nablus, and Hebron, and the normal working population. And I'm sure that they are suffering. But that hasn't made the news because it's expected that that should happen. And maybe even they're called sacrificing on behalf of Gaza. But that's their problem, unfortunately, not ours.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, I know there are a lot of Palestinian students from, say, areas A or whatever under full Palestinian rule who study at Ariel University. There's a lot of Palestinians who work at the joint industrial park near Ariel. Do you know if any of that is still going on, or there's been just a separation of the peoples?
To the best of my knowledge, security has prohibited Arabs from coming into either the communities, the cities, institutions, or industrial parks. I know, for example, many people in Shiloh who are in the midst of construction of additions to their homes, a second floor or 2 more rooms, something like that, have been stuck. And everything is slowed down considerably.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know of any relief for those restrictions. There might be in certain cases, whether we're talking about doctors or real professional staff, but no, it's the economic situation is in a bit of a down spiral for the local Arab population.
Yeah. Now, I've been a little surprised that I know the IDF is in Judea and Samaria, going into the Palestinian cities and taking out terror leaders, finding weapons, even terror tunnels, looking even for rockets, armed manufacturing. But overall, there hasn't been the sort of uprising in these areas that I think Hamas was expecting. I know the first or second Friday after October 7th, they were calling for a march on Al-Aqsa to rise up and whatever, and it didn't happen in Jerusalem. Has it happened in your area? My sense is that when the Arabs in the territories in East Jerusalem saw Israel mobilize over 300,000 soldiers, they knew Israel was serious. Hamas had probably gone too far, and they were afraid to do anything.
I would basically agree with you and refine that just a little bit as we're on the eve of the Ramadan month. In the first 2 to 3 months, it was obvious to the Arabs that Israelis were very angry, very hurt, very injured in a national sense, and they knew that it would not pay for them to overtly use mass demonstrations or otherwise. The terror is ongoing. There have been shootings. Rock throwing is a daily occurrence and other forms. But the Israeli army immediately went into an assertive campaign. I think we have over 3,000 terrorists or terrorist suspects arrested. Almost about 45% of them identified already as Hamas. As you said, weapons confiscation, and even using drones in order to eliminate known terrorists. So they're on they have been warned. I think their feeling is it doesn't help their cause to touch base with us and cause us to act. However, with the argumentation this past week or two over how to restrict entrance of Arabs into the Haram al-Sharif, into the Temple Mount compound, they are very sensitive, and they pick up weakness or doubt or uncertainty on our part. And just the other day, we had a 13 or 14-year-old youngster, teenager, stab someone in the Neve Yaakov neighborhood. And how to keep a balance between making sure they know we will act very assertively on the one hand, and then placate the world and the media by being humanitarian, by being moral, and I'm talking a little bit sarcastically here for our listeners, is a balancing act that Israel has had to go through over the decades, and it's very difficult to do when you're faced with a threat that can kill or injure civilians, mostly here in Israel.
Yeah, we've had shooting terror attacks at the entrance to Jerusalem near the String Bridge. We had the one coming through the Tunnels Road from the Efrat block, the Gush Etzion block, and there you had a Palestinian police officer shoot 2 Israelis at a gas station at Eli, which is probably just right near you.
Correct. It was almost a repeat of an incident in which 4 were killed just about a year ago or so, because that gas station, serving both Arabs and Jews, sits right on the highway. It's not inside the Jewish community of Eli. And so therefore it's I wouldn't want to call it a sitting duck, but for our audience to understand, it's right on the highway and is an inviting target, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you've been through personally, your community and everyone, you've been through some tough times, the Second Intifada and all. And right now you think the IDF has the situation in good control. They seem to be more assertive. Do they need to have a fuller sweep through the West Bank? Maybe are there terror tunnels you're worried about, arms manufacturing, something they need to be even more intense about it?
Well, I don't think we have the tunnels at the present because most of our geologic reality is stones.
Mhm.
We get them in through our windshields, but it'd be very difficult for them to dig. But yes, there are workshops that produce weapons. They've tried in the North Samaria. We've seen several video clips of rocket launching. It's been a failure, thankfully,
Mhm.
up until now, but doesn't mean they're not thinking that way. And if they had any ability to link up Gaza and Judea and Samaria and therefore open up perhaps smuggling as they do between Egypt and Gaza, that would be very difficult. They have not given up on their terror campaign.
Mhm.
Whether they're meeting with Mr. Blinken, the Secretary of State, or with any other diplomatic or political leader from the West that comes into Ramallah, it's just not on the cards. People are being fooled if they think that there's any talk about pacification. I
Mhm.
remember many years ago when the Irish engaged in peace talks, they talked about decommissioning. In other words, getting rid of all the rifles. And there, if I may make a comment about a general thing about peace with our Arab neighbors, there are two things that have to be done. First of all, a proper census. I want to know exactly how many people there are there, who they are, what age, etc. And secondly, even if the Oslo, the first accords, agreed to a certain amount of weapons being supplied or military vehicles, we have to begin all over again. We take back everything and then we redistribute it because the amount of lethal weaponry in the hands of the Arabs of Judea and Samaria is out of proportion to their needs, and it just encourages them to use them for offensive terror against Jews.
Yeah, I think your call for a census, the last few times I've driven up your way, there's a lot of nice Arab homes near the highway that they're dark, they're empty, and it may be Arab families that are living abroad, but they're still registered as living there. Is this what you're getting at?
Partially,
Yeah.
because they make claims for large numbers that make a demographic threat, or
Yeah.
it's 50%, 50%. And I don't think those are the numbers.
Mhm.
And I think that we can control the population. It's not as large as they claim. And we would like to continue Israeli administration in one form or another over the entire geographical area.
So you're talking about the demographic battle that guys like Yoram Ettinger are fighting against Pergola or some of the other and the Palestinian demographers. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Um, uh, right now, it seems one of the fallouts from this war is the U.S. is cracking down on what it calls extremist settlers. First time we're using the S word here, Israel, but the U.S. and even the EU are sanctioning, blocking bank accounts, travel bans on people they have identified as extremist settlers, trying to give a moral equivalence between them and Hamas terrorists. I think it's outrageous and all. But you know, there are these reports that there are Jews who live out in the territories who are a bit a law to themselves. They don't exactly leave it to the IDF to handle things. That some of them destroy Palestinian olive groves or you know, chase the shepherds back and what's the truth here and what is your view on what the U.S. is doing in this sort of crackdown against this image of the, you know, the renegade settler?
Well, first of all, I take umbrage at the term settler violence,
Mhm.
which basically broad strokes with a wide brush as if 500,000 Jews living throughout Judea and Samaria are violent. That is a wrong assertion. We're talking about maybe 300 to 500, mainly youths, who on occasion act in a violent way that is maybe no worse than what happens sometime at college football games in terms of destruction or damage. However, because it is directed against, say, an olive grove or, as you said, shepherds, it goes on the first page of your newspapers and is used and has become weaponized. And in fact, the amount of settler so-called violent acts has dropped considerably over the past 2 years. I've gone online just before coming on the program, on the webinar, and it's over a 50% drop in the last 6 months. So all this talk is basically propaganda.
Even though in the past year there's been a spike in Palestinian terrorism in Judea and Samaria. It's the worst year since the Second Intifada, but you're saying this phenomena of settler violence has dropped.
On our side, definitely. On the Arab side, that's the side that's having the uptick and the spike. Not only that, the counting of the events, many of them, so-called violent, are simply Jews going into the Temple Mount. And as you know, nothing violent happens there, but because they call it storming, because they don't give us permission for religious Jews to go in and sneak a prayer or say a psalm on the sly, that by them is a violent act. Not only, but moreover, the organs that count these acts never check up. They simply accept as fact what Mr. Ahmed or Mr. Muhammad has reported, and 50% of that goes to the Palestinian Authority. They never go to check or take a photograph or demand a hospital report or anything else like that. And the other 50% is reported by Israeli NGOs, non-government organizations, that have contracts and get paid in terms of contributions from European countries to do this reporting. So, I mean, if you're getting paid to report on violence by settlers, you have an interest to report anything and everything as violent, and then leave it up to someone else to figure out whether it actually happened or didn't happen. And my last point on this, since we're talking to religious people who I think are concerned with morality, if the Arabs of Judea and Samaria are deserving of a state, even though they've been so violent and so terroristic over the years, to condemn Jews in many cases to defend themselves or to expel invaders who come into their land and either construct or bring cows or plant, when the question of the ownership of the land is not clear. This is a very controversial and very complex issue, and to do what Mr. Biden did, issue this executive order, I think is wrong on the basis of the facts, and I'm not quite sure how legal it is, because what you're doing actually is no one has been proven guilty, but you're saying, I think those four are interfering with United States foreign policy. To be accused of, I mean, you can demonstrate on behalf or against American foreign policy. How can you close their bank account is something else entirely.
It's not due process of law. There's also the Biden administration facing a lot of pressure from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party So they've sort of started pressing for a Palestinian state or a two-state solution more, trying to pressure Israel, twist Israel's arm into this. But they've also just said that their policy has shifted back, that the settlements are illegal. I mean, that's how the media is reporting it. I think in diplomatic terms, they're saying that the Jewish communities, the settlements, are not consistent with international law. That's how they say it. And I think it's the inverse of what under Trump, what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, his important formulation, that the Israeli communities in Judea Samaria are not inconsistent with international law. And it's not saying they're totally legal, but they're not illegal. And can you set us straight a little? The U.S. said we're going back to the way it always was. They're illegal. That's how it's being reported in the media. And I know you handle this issue well.
Well, let's do this in a very methodical, simple, point by point. In the first instance, it wasn't only Mr. Pompeo. Madeleine Albright, a former United States Secretary of State, and President Ronald Reagan, way back in the early 80s, would not allow the communities of Jews in Judea and Samaria to be called illegal. It was not a legal question. Why is that? That's because when the League of Nations decided in 1922 that there would be a restitution of the Jewish historic national home, they clarified and guaranteed two rights to the Jews: the right to immigrate and the right of close settlement. You can Google this if you don't believe me.
The exact word.
But that's the language of Article 6 of the League of Nations Mandate for Palestine. All the area from at least the river in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west was the Jewish Palestine area. Now, between 1948 and 1967, there was no other sovereign power in that area. Jordan had annexed it, but that was illegal. That even the United States said was illegal. In fact, except for England, no one said it was legal. Okay, so we did not take over in 1967 territory of another country. What I'm trying to point out is that it's an open question. You want to call disputed territories. And I think that the Jewish people have a better claim to settle, to construct, to live, to plant, to do all sorts of aspects of livelihood of a people in that area, at least as equal as the local population. And we have to discuss this. We have to negotiate it if you want to come to a final resolution of the conflict. But we are not in the least illegal at all. And I think this is a besmirching of the Jewish history and right to the land of Israel, which is unbefitting for Mr. Biden. He's been a longtime opponent of the communities, but on a political basis, and that we can argue. But to go into the area of legality, or as you were very exact, inconsistent with international law, there is no international law that says building settlements is illegal in territory that is not sovereign of another country.
Yeah, this is in the World Court of Justice in The Hague right now, this advisory opinion that the UN General Assembly, the Flat Earth Society, has asked the World Court to give a ruling on whether Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria is an illegal occupation. But I'd encourage everyone, Israel Medad just did a column, I think in the Jerusalem Post, on this issue within the last week or so. And he goes back to how the Balfour Declaration, 1917, commits Britain to encouraging close Jewish settlement on the land. Those are exact words. The U.S. Congress endorsed this when it was, they weren't a member of the League of Nations at the time, when the League of Nations approved the British mandate to encourage close Jewish settlement on the land, but the U.S. Congress approved it. The State Department knew it. And under the UN Charter, all the obligations under the League of Nations carry over into the modern era. And yeah, Jews should have the right to live anywhere in Judea Samaria. It's just up to Israel to try and work out where its borders are with its Arab neighbors. That's still the struggle there. Let me ask you, I don't want to, let me first ask about the threat of Ramadan right now. That, you know, it appears, I think that the Israeli intelligence services have something that Iran is looking for an escalation in Judea and Samaria, and particularly in Jerusalem, around the Temple Mount during Ramadan. Do you see signs of it? What do you know about this issue?
Well, we know that all the extremist Arab groups, from Hamas to Fatah, have been calling on Arabs to go into the Haram compound in Jerusalem, especially on the Fridays. You've been here long enough to know that sometimes there are tens of thousands of them. Now, if they want to go onto the Temple Mount and pray at the mosque or outside the mosque, as they usually do because it's crowded, Israel has no opposition to that. What happens is that two things. They begin to wave Hamas or other banners and flags, and then begin to whip up the crowd, and then someone gets up and makes a speech and praises the killing of Jews and Hamas in Gaza. And either you have a small riot, or worse, as has happened, they begin to throw rocks over the wall into the Western Wall plaza down below, which has happened several times over the years, which is violence and which can hurt, or even worse, to people down there. And then the police come in. Or in other instances that happened, I think 2 years ago specifically, they would sleep overnight inside Al-Aqsa, store rocks and fireworks and Molotov cocktails. And then when the doors open in the morning, this is usually during the week, they attack anybody who's not a non-Muslim there, causing again the police to come in. It seems that there will be no restrictions on Arab Israelis who want to come there. There will be age restrictions for those from Judea and Samaria, because we've had the experience in the previous years. Unfortunately, because of pressure from the world, we don't have those, I think they're called magnometers, or those electric gates that people go through that will identify through magnetism any weapons or knives or something like that.
Metal detectors, yeah.
Metal detectors, thank you. And of course, that means that we yield to a certain extent on our security concerns. But we have to bend over backwards. It's one of the postures that you have to assume here in Israel. Bend over backwards, because they will make claims that they're being persecuted, or they're being discriminated against, or they have no freedom of worship, and we don't want that to be the case. On the other hand, we don't want anybody, Jews or even Christians, to be injured by the riots that have happened up there. As for Ramadan as a whole, I mentioned earlier, we've already had a stabbing this week. The online, digital, social media platforms are full of incitement. Yeah. And we have to be alert. And I hope that we go through this period. I want to point out, as I did in another article, that a Palestinian, let me put it this way, a Muslim woman at the Kaaba in Mecca, the most holy Muslim site, attempted to raise a flag of Palestine, and the police in Saudi Arabia immediately took it away from her. And one of the imams at the mosque said, mosques are for religious observance and prayer. You want to have a political demonstration? Go somewhere else. If only Israel could tell that to the Muslims who come into the Temple Mount compound.
Yeah, that's interesting. But it seems Israel's trying to keep, I wouldn't call Ramadan holy myself, but it seems Israel's trying to keep it more sacred than the Palestinians themselves by inciting to violence and killing during this period of fasting. Now I want to get back. You have a special connection to Menachem Begin because working at the Begin Center, we don't have a lot of time to flesh it all out, but there's been all sorts of, if Israel comes under pressure to recognize a Palestinian state, maybe they don't do it, but is there some plan out there that you're comfortable with? I know people like Karen Glick has a plan. David Friedman just came out with one that treat them kind of like Puerto Rico, where they can sort of run their own lives. They just can't vote for president and vote for this and that. Trump had a plan, and I think Menachem Begin set the model that you can have peace with Arab countries without resolving the Palestinian issue. He was really the first Abraham Accord when they made peace with Egypt and left in the documents, the treaties, that there would be talks over what to do with the Palestinians. But is there something you think that could really solve the whole problem? Because you probably studied this for many, many years.
I have studied it, and I've written about it, even researched it to a certain extent. And let me just touch on one aspect, because it's very difficult today, especially in the atmosphere that I see from London to New York and other places, a demand for a Palestinian state, as if without a free Palestine, we can't get on with life, or even Israel cannot exist. And even that is being turned over. I see recalls now, abolish Zionism. Anyway, the issue, or the threshold, if I can call it, is that if something doesn't work, we have to solve that problem and not go on. You've also been around a long time, and you know that basically the Arab position is whenever they're stopped or whenever the negotiations stop, the next time it's picked up, they ignore whatever happened and make new demands and completely ignore what was the problem in the first place that stopped the negotiations. So I always believe in a situation of adopting what Mr. Begin called an autonomy. In other words, let's see what happens for the first 5 years of autonomy. If everything is okay, we can go to the next stage. That could be a condominium. It could be a
confederation.
Federation, all sorts of issues, until eventually, now they can say, but you're not treating us properly. And we could answer, yes, but we've been around 100 years on this issue. From the Mufti to Arafat to Abbas to Hamas. We know what's happened. We know what usually happens. Give us the acknowledgement that we know what you guys are really interested, which is no Israel whatsoever. Yeah. So let's take this stage by stage. And if you're very good, if you are prove worthy of the next stage, you eventually will get a state maybe. But if you incite, if you have no peace education program, if you arm yourselves and attack us, why should we continue to negotiate and give you something or allow you something when, if you do get that, in the end result, it'll be 10 times worse for us than at the present? Give us an acknowledgement that we know what's really happening. And and the world doesn't back us on this.
Mhm.
And I think that's my contribution to understanding how a plan, any plan, could eventually succeed.
Yeah, I think Oslo tested whether an autonomy, give them an autonomy of their own self-rule would work, and they just used it as part of the PLO stages plan. Any territory that you get, you just use it to launch more attacks against Israel. And this is the great irony and even shock that world leaders are pushing a two-state solution that neither Fatah nor Hamas really accept. Fatah also wants to destroy Israel itself through right of return. But I don't hear right of return being talked about much. There's a battle over whether UNRWA will continue, will it be reformed, will it be disbanded? But I think October 7th killed the right of return, and Israel would never, ever accept it.
I would agree with you. And I don't know how many Arabs would like to return under the circumstances as they have developed, not because we wouldn't welcome them, because they realize that they're used as pawns. I mean, everybody is crying about the humanitarian situation when it was the Hamas that did not build uh, shelters for
Hospitals,
their people,
schools,
did
yeah.
not take care of them. They
Mm,
used and stole all the money from the Gazan civilian population as part of their military stratagem. And now
mm,
the when it happens, right,
mm,
and the civilians are not being protected, it's Israel's fault for some reason.
mhm. Okay, let's go with one last question. Let's say we get Hezbollah, Israel. Many expect in this later this spring, Israel to go into Lebanon to deal with the Hezbollah threat. Is that going to have more of an impact on you guys in Judea and Samaria, if that were to happen?
Well, David, we've been warned that Hezbollah is much better armed and equipped, being the direct route between Iran through Syria into Lebanon. So we have to expect a much more of a damage assessment that could happen, God forbid, if Hezbollah gets the okay from Iran to continue or elevating its level of aggression against Israel. And if they do not stop, there will be a war, and it will be very destructive for Lebanon. Because, and I think Israel should be able to expect that our strength over the past 3 to 4 months gives us the right to completely unenable, I'm sure that's not the proper English word, disenable Hezbollah's infrastructures, storerooms, launch sites, military camps, as much as possible. And unfortunately, because they've used civilian areas, again, there will be civilian damage and a crisis. And again, we'll see the world pressure Israel to stop before we can properly assure our security. I hope we don't reach that level of damage, both to Lebanon and, of course, to Israel. But then I think if it does happen, Judea and Samaria, or at least Samaria, may be under a higher level of attack than we see coming from Gaza.
Yeah, you could be a sort of a special target for them with some of their guided missiles. Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to pray the best for y'all and safety over Ramadan and as we head into Passover. Israel Medad from the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem, but a resident of Shiloh and an advocate for the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria. We thank you for your time, a very important issue, checking out what's happening with the current war down in Gaza, how's it affecting the 500,000 Jews or so who live out in Judea and Samaria. Thank you for your time.
David, thank you very much for having me on.
Okay, we'll be back next week with another edition of the ICEJ webinar series. Join us then. And we thank you for being with us today. And at the top of the hour, 4 o'clock, Jerusalem time, you can join us for the global prayer gathering, daily prayer with Christians from all over the world for Israel and the region. Join us then. And thank you. God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us for this informative webinar. Be sure to subscribe to our social media channels or visit our website at icej.org for upcoming webinars and more ICEJ exclusive content.